So if you can get 2 things done with a large impact to the company versus 10 things done with very little impact, I would rate that higher, because that is really what I'm looking at. And that's really what people should be looking at in general. I mean, it's kind of like the 80-20 rule, right? Like, you want to make sure that you have, that you're making an impact. And I feel a lot of times we get into this tactical day-to-day thing, and we forget, like, why are we doing what we're doing to begin with? And that incorporates into work-life balance, because also you feel more fulfilled doing your job if you do have a larger impact.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Mark Moyu, and our guest today is Yinka Badejo.
Yes.
Yinka, tell me if I did it right?
Yes, you did it right.
Okay, fantastic. So I'd like to sort of start with telling us where you're from, where you actually live now currently, and what you're sort of working on.
Yeah, so I am originally from St. Maarten. St. Maarten is a very tiny island in the Caribbean, 37 square miles, not that many people, but it is divided by Dutch and French. I'm from the Dutch side. And I currently live in San Francisco. So I am a data science manager at Facebook for their business integrity team within their ads and business products. So that's how they make vast majority of their revenue, right, is through ads. And so you can think of my role as ensuring that through like after clicking on an advertisement, users don't have bad experiences. So things like scams, election interference, I don't know, you bought something from an ad and you didn't receive it type of thing. So yeah.
Sounds complex, and I imagine it's very big scale as well, right?
Yeah. So I mean, it's a big scale, but it's also very complex because not all revenue is good revenue. So I mean, like, you know, in innovation, things move so fast, and you want to encourage growth, but you also want to mitigate the risk at the same time. So it's like constantly moving at a fast pace to trying to mitigate the risk at the same time. And so we deal with a lot of broad topics just because of that.
Great. And, you know, we're going to dive into your career journey, and we're very happy that, you know, you're the first representative who's not from Trinidad. So super excited about that. Why did you choose to kind of work at Facebook? You, I guess, recently joined, and kind of tell us what that was like.
So I joined Facebook 4 months ago. And to be fair, I mean, it's not like I was seeking out opportunity. I was working at Ernst & Young at the time, actually doing very well at my job. I was kind of on a very fast track to being a partner. And so like during the pandemic itself, I felt like very burnt out from the work that I was doing in consulting. Consulting, if no one knows anything about consulting, they know about the burnout. Like, people really do get burnout. There's a lot of hours that you have to work. Even in the pandemic, if you're not traveling Monday to Thursday, you're still working a lot of hours. And it's a very demanding role, especially in data science. So, like, you know, I consulted in the data science space and consulting for quite some time. And so for me, when this opportunity arose, I already envisioned what type of role I wanted to have for myself if I had to leave consulting. So I can either like continue to go on this track to partner, or if I left, it was going to be 2 things. One, for my own business. So I would have started my own business. Or the second thing was a role that I would have found the perfect things that made what I enjoy. So something that was like social impact oriented for sure. Something that uses my data science experience and background. something that I'm not doing like hands-on coding every day because I actually hate coding. And then something that I'm not like working 12 hours a day either, because I truly believe in work-life balance. And so those things had to come together. So Facebook presented actually a couple opportunities for me, which I was just like really happy to see that I can actually live this life that I dreamed of the whole time. And so that's the reason why I took on this role.
Cool. And I imagine you're a lot happier now, consulting, as you say.
Absolutely.
I haven't been an official consultant, but being on a professional services team, once a project is on, you're on.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yep. So we do this show to encourage people from the Caribbean diaspora to continue pursuing these things called data careers, or let's sort of call it a data career. So can you share with us your view of how you think machine learning, AI, more general tech is going to play a role in the Caribbean's future? And I would guess, definitely tell us about your particular region of the Caribbean and how you see that having an impact there.
Yeah. So I mean, this is kind of all encompassing, right? It is the tech, it's the data, it's the being able to understand where we are today and then where we want to be in the future, from like our historical information, right? And so I feel like bringing that into context, like as a Caribbean as a whole, we just live, and St. Maarten sees this probably more than some islands. We're just in a hurricane path all the time. And so in one aspect, it's like about resiliency and sustainable economy, right? And there's like, we can't constantly, majority of the Caribbean depends on tourism, for example. So we can't constantly have traditional ways to support our economy through tourism. Like we'd have to find alternative means, and this can be even finding hybrid means as well of using tourism and like tech together or something like that. Like so that's one thought that I've always kept in mind, is like we do have to move forward as the Caribbean because we're in a very vulnerable spot in comparison to the rest of the world, given where we sit as a region. The other thing is when it comes to like world politics, I do feel like there is a trend of having more transparency around corruption when you have like data, right? And I've actually read articles around this, and I feel like in the Caribbean, like we get so used to like day-to-day politics, but like we don't have like fact base to really have a sound judgment on. And like in particular in St. Maarten, like we have a very high attrition of government. I mean, I feel like almost every year we have a new government type of thing. And and I feel like when that happens too, you switch ministries and stuff like that, but you have to be also sustainable in terms of your infrastructure and your data and this and that. And that handover just kind of delays us over time. So I definitely feel like that's like another kind of way to see how tech and data and AI plays a role. But I think when it comes to AI in particular, this is for me more of a vision than it is a how this is going to help today, because I do feel as though AI is just kind of like the most advanced thing you can do, right? But actually we need to kind of start from more basic things that you can do right now in the Caribbean. I still feel like we're going through that basic phase. And so in terms of AI, I definitely think that this is just really kind of helping promote and support efficiency within the Caribbean. And I don't know how it is in Trinidad, but like every time I go to St. Maarten, I just get so annoyed by still having to wait in bank lines and still having to, like do things through cash. Like it is the most annoying thing that could happen. I'm just like, we're way behind. And this isn't even AI. Like this is going back to like, the basics, but like AI can help improve this long term and make this sustainable and kind of help us with a long-term vision and where we want to go. So.
Great. And you sort of, I imagine, stumbled upon data science, right? If someone kind of looks at your LinkedIn, they'll see the certain degrees that you sort of took.
Yeah.
And did you have anyone who was from your country that you knew who was in data science that kind of opened that door to you, or you more or less stumbled upon it on your own?
I think, to be honest with you, for a long time, I hated this term data science because I definitely felt like it was a buzzword for like, and then now like AI is a new kind of buzz phrase type of thing. When we were going to Florida Tech, like I just wanted to study math. And so that's what I studied, right? And so people were mathematicians or statisticians or engineers and this and that. And then somehow throughout my career journey, like data science became a word that apparently I fall under. And so I didn't really like choose this path. The path chose me. So like my no one ever described what this would be. I remember when I first told my mom I wanted to study math, she thought automatically I would be a teacher. Like she was just, oh, so you want to teach? I'm like, no, actually, that's the last thing I want to do. I just kind of want to do something really smart, something to make the world more efficient, basically. But I didn't have any words or terminology to put next to it. Like I learned what operations research was through college, not through someone like actually saying, this is a study that you can study type of thing. So that's kind of how my, path came about in terms of data science. Yeah.
Understood. So you left home, you came to Florida Tech in Florida to study math. Let's talk about math. So I think oftentimes you see people, there are two camps, right? There are folks that know they really love math. They don't inherently have this fear of math. And then there's the other camp, yes, I'm generalizing. And then there's the other camp of folks where there's a spectrum of ambiguity all the way up to just deep fear of math in general. What can you say to the latter group of people who maybe doubt that, hey, I can do or pursue some type of math-driven career, be it a STEM career, be it math, actual like math? Were you always good at math, or is that something that you developed over time?
Yeah. So this is a really good question. I think I've always felt like I was good at math. And so that's why I wanted to study it. So like I knew if I didn't study for a math test, I would still get a good grade. That was kind of my anchor of like how I was putting myself in terms of math. Having said that, I've had very challenging math courses at the same time that kind of like threw me for a loop. And I think that I didn't understand where I was going to go within the first 3 years of studying math. So I actually, like at junior year, I was like, is this something I still want to continue studying? Like, what am I going to do here? And if it wasn't for like my career counselor who specialized in operations research, I didn't know where I was going to go next with this thing, because at this point in time, I've seen all the parts of math, the parts that I know I can do, the parts that were more challenging. And I was just like, I'm not sure if this is careers for me, but the parts that I found that I know I can do and that was also more interesting in problem space area, I just really just then dive deep into. I think though that I have been also privileged growing up with people always reinforcing that I am good in math. And I know that some people have the opposite reinforcement of that. You're not good in math, right? So they kind of get that fear of not wanting to dive into it because that keeps reoccurring throughout the entire life. And I also feel like people don't really understand what it is they're doing with math when they're doing it, right? So I do feel like math is a set of logical problems that you have to solve. And people don't see it that way. They just see it as like some type of big puzzle that they can't solve. And it's kind of like a black box. And I think if there was more application from like an early age on how you can use math, then it would create more interest, but also you don't have to feel as though it's a big puzzle that you can't solve, because we solve some of these problems literally every day. So
yes. And I think one of the messages I wanted to suss out from that question for everyone to take away is it never hurts to learn more math in your career at any point, because I think they're just different problems that you can solve based on some of those principles. So you've done your bachelor's in math and you're like, I don't know, maybe not. And you did this thing called operations research. So can you tell the audience, what is operations research and how is that sort of like a viable option for folks who have a math background? Can you actually get into it without much of a math background as well? That's kind of interesting as well.
Yeah. So actually, when I was looking into grad schools, I was looking into operations research as a degree. And every university does it differently. You can get a degree in operations research as part of a MBA program. And so you can just specialize in this specialty area. You can do it as part of an industrial engineering program. I did mine within still the same math department. And I think the biggest thing to know about operations research, it's technically for math, it's a newer practice in general, right? It just kind of started during like military or World War II time frame or something like that. And it was basically the way to find the best solution to where you have like a set of constraints, and then you have like all of these different variables or things going on. And so what's kind of like, the best possible outcome that you can have from this, given problem space, right? And that's just from a very high level. In a more like applicable level, you see these things come up in more like in an operational setting. So like, I for a long time, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this, but for a long time, I worked within like more of operational fields. So I worked in aircraft manufacturing, in the railroad, because this is like directly impacting how they either find like what's the best capacity in an area, or, what are the right number of machines we should have in the machine shop to produce, I don't know, this amount of demand and stuff like that. So those are the type of problem areas that operations research cover.
So let's maybe dive into your career journey thus far, right? So you've come from St. Maarten, you came to Florida, you did a bachelor's in math, then you did your master's in operations research. And kind of tell us in a highlight way, sort of what happened all the way up until where you are now, and then we'll dive into each piece.
Yeah. So then I went into working at aircraft manufacturing company called Piper Aircraft. So any pilot would probably know a Piper plane because they've probably trained in one. And so when I joined Piper, it was they needed operations research analysts. It was new to their business. And they actually came to FIT to look for someone who was about to finish school. Okay. They came directly to our department. And so this started with just looking at the machine shop problem that I talked. That was actually the first problem that I actually worked in real life. And so then that kind of transformed into like multiple things. And then I basically saw the entire manufacturing plant and saw my whole career like flash before my eyes. And I was just like, okay, I'm done here. Like my work here is done. And so then I wanted to work specifically, I knew I wanted to work for a Fortune 500 company because Piper was it was a private company, 1,000 employees, one plant. And I wanted to be working in a more broader space. So I worked at CSX, which is a freight railroad company that operates all over the East Coast. And I worked there as an industrial engineer, but also kind of switched into network modeling and analytics manager, which in theory, the actual work was really not that different. I worked I was called an industrial engineer because I actually worked in the field. So I worked at plants. And then when I moved to corporate office headquarters, I got a kind of a different title change, right? So, but here, a lot of the work that I did was around simulating what would happen on the railroad, whether it's within a plant or whether it's on the entire network. That was a lot of the work that I did. And I think at this point in time, I recognize for myself that I can do this at any company. Right. So this is how consulting started to come about, because I was just like, I'm just using very similar principles and just different type of problems. And it doesn't matter what industry. And it does help to have industry context, right? But at the same time, it's not critical to actually being successful at my job. And so one of my close friends, Candace, was working at McKinsey at the time. And I remember me and her talking about pay. And I was like, what am I doing with my life? So I only applied to MBB consulting firms, which McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, and Bain, on purpose, because I knew that this is going to be the highest salary band in consulting, and I needed to dive into it. And BCG was a fish that bit here. So I actually got that opportunity, landed a really good opportunity at BCG. And it was actually, to be honest with you, kind of tumultuous time in my life. It was not smooth sailing at all. It was also very cultural shock to be working in consulting for me. I just wasn't used to the consulting life, and it took some time to adopt. I also was not used to not being the smartest person in the room. And and it's not that I was, thinking highly of myself in my previous careers, but I was always in a niche. So operations research was new at Piper. Simulation was a very small group of people in the railroad that could do it, but it impacted the entire company. And here I am in consulting, and the partner that I'm supporting has a PhD in operations research at Georgia Tech. And he can tell me how to write the equations better than I can. So I also went through this imposter syndrome that people talk about, which is another term that I learned in my career. I didn't know that this thing existed. So from BCG, I took all those learnings, and then I went into Ernst & Young, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And I was actually very successful at Ernst & Young doing it. And then you heard my story path to coming here to Facebook. So that's the path.
And this is all within, how many years did you sort of traverse this path post-graduation?
Yeah, post-graduation. I actually started working at Piper in my last semester of grad school. So this would be almost 9 years of experience now.
Okay, nice. So you've been at some of the top consulting firms. Now you're at Facebook. So we're gonna traverse this journey, and there's some things I kind of want to maybe pull out for folks in the audience that I think one thing that's extremely clear about your career journey is, okay, you had a strong foundation in math. How much did you know about airplanes before you worked at Piper?
My ex is a pilot, and what I knew was from him, and so it was a pilot view of airplanes.
Interesting.
But he could never tell me how to build a plane. I knew nothing about machine shops. I had to learn more about CNC machines, and I had to learn about the actual aircraft. I had to learn about the process of how you take sheet metal and then get it into the right shape and form, and then put the pieces together and rivet it together and all sorts of stuff like that. Had no clue any of these terminologies existed. My vocabulary expanded very quickly. So in some sense, I had to start from ground zero. And to be honest with you, that was probably the basis for the rest of my career, which is starting from ground zero, because I always have been in situations where I didn't have any context, right? And in consulting, it just kind of is a cycle of being on projects where you don't have any context. You're learning the client industry or the client itself or whatever. So
I guess lesson number one for everyone on the call or on the show, it doesn't kind of matter if you know an industry or not, right? You can enter a particular industry and learn very quickly, but there was a fundamental skill set that you had in terms of modeling how different systems work and finding the optimal sort of parameters to solve a bunch of different problems. So after Piper, you've learned all these very interesting things about manufacturing. And I guess, like you said, you saw your career flash before your eyes. Did you kind of see like, oh, I could be this manager by this particular period, or you just literally saw the end and you're like, nah, I'm over
it? So that's a good question. So I started in machine shop, and then I actually went from finishing a problem at the machine shop. So I optimized the machine shop. Cool. Then I finished that problem. Then I went to the assembly line. So then I had to create a predictive model for the assembly line to be better at like capacity on how many resources are needed in the assembly line. Then they put me in upholstery, and I had to do some visualization work on upholstery and understanding also upholstery efficiencies and very detailed things about upholstery. Then I ended up in the paint shop and had to understand paint shop waste and what was going to be like the most optimal amount of paint that we actually need within the paint shop. And then I ended up at the flight line, which I had to been able to help with. I had to help the flight line because they were putting in a new Jarman in, and I had to help understand mitigating the risk of taking out old equipment and new equipment, whatever the case is. And so throughout I literally saw the entire manufacturing plant of Piper.
I see.
And I saw, at the time for me, then I would have been like, either industrial engineer or continue my path as like a senior operations analyst, whatever. And I saw the engineers, the manufacturing engineers, industrial engineers, the ones that were more senior, they've worked at Piper for like 8 years, 10 years. I think the ones with the least experience worked there at 5 years. And here I am, just like 1 or 2 years. And I'm just like, oh my God, can I do this like repeatedly over and over again and not really move up? Because there's not much places that you can move.
Yes.
And I feel like I've also already done everything on a broad scale already. And because of the limitation of potential, I just couldn't see myself there. So that's what I meant. Long term, it's not like my love for planes or manufacturing planes left. In fact, it was very fun for me. I got to meet some really great people in that environment. I've done some really cool things. I've been like in test flights before. I took in a riveting class. Like, it's really cool stuff.
Yes.
But I couldn't do this for 10 years. And so that's why I left.
Cool. And then now you're in the railroad industry, which is typically a fairly slow industry. I think that's one thing we share in common. I was in the railroad industry as well. And it's just kind of like, they're trying new things, but it's such a safety bound environment that you're not able to sort of do certain things. So what can you tell us about the things that you learned in school, things that you learned in the aircraft industry that allowed you to step into the railroad industry, which is, you're on the ground, moving a lot slower than planes. So any thoughts there?
So I think a lot of the things with the railroad is really more culturally a problem, right? Yeah. So the whole culture of moving slow and, there's just, it's mostly unionized and knowing how to work with people and stuff like that. The good thing for me is when I worked at Piper, I already had this like innate ability to know how to work with different people. And so like I've worked with, everyone from the C-suite to the person who's actually working the job on the floor, which goes a long way in the railroad, right? So I earned my stripes being in the field type of thing with union workers. Like, I can still give you referrals from union workers in the shop floor at the railroad. That's the only way I was able to actually move the needle. My degree in mathematics and operations research, I took simulation courses, right? So there was very few people who actually knew how to do simulation. And so like I was one of them. So I knew how to do simulation, right? So I think that's where my degree kind of prepared me for these things. I also understood like math to the core. So I knew like what did not need to happen in order for things kind of be out of bounds. So we had this one black box code, we used to call it, that no one understood. But there was like one simple math equation that it just completely messed up capacity loading. And I was like, we need to fix this specific line. The rest of the code I didn't understand, but I knew that line was causing trouble. Like those are the things that through like theoretical understanding, right?
Yes.
So
it sounded like you paid attention in class.
Yeah, I kind of did. I only start paying attention when I realize that I'm actually gonna have a career.
Right? It takes a while for that to kick in sometimes.
Yeah, it does.
Great. So you're at the railroad, and as you mentioned, right, the railroad is a very, I don't want to call it a fixed sort of mindset place, but it is very traditional. It is one of those industries that it's a very respect-based thing. And you're a woman in the railroad industry, and don't typically think you see many women, across the railroad industry, especially going from the floor and into corporate. Can you tell us what was your experience like as a woman in that environment, traditionally very male dominated, and what did you do in your mindset to, make sure that you succeeded?
Yeah, so I would say this thing about being a woman, I didn't know that this was going to be a thing until I started working, right? Because in my classes, the ratio was already there. Like no one was like, I've been to like these women conferences in school, whatever the case is, but like it didn't sink in what that was going to mean for my career. So I did have probably more challenge in the railroad than I did at the aircraft manufacturing company, but I still had challenges at the aircraft manufacturing company as well. In the railroad, being a woman is definitely a thing. So I started in management training program, and they brought 3 departments together from the railroad: engineering, what was it? Repairs or whatever the case is. I can't remember what's it called. And then just transportation, right? So these 3 departments have management training program for 6 months. So I did the management training program for 6 months. I was 1 out of 3 women in a class of 70. Yeah.
What?
Yeah. So wow. I thought that this was already a problem, and I recognized it. Now, it was me. Yeah. So, and then when it comes to being a Black woman, this also adds a dynamic as well. So there was 1 other Black woman in there, but we were 2 out of 10 Black people within the class. So I feel like I was already kind of put into this niche. And then I get to the manufacturing shop, and I am the only woman in the entire manufacturing shop. The only other woman that was there was the lady who stocked up the vending machines.
No way.
Yeah. Exactly. Eventually they became like a couple female supervisors, but I actually was the only person who was not a non-union worker within the shop. So that also posed its challenges. And the biggest challenge is that when you work, especially in these type of operation fields, the assumption is that women don't understand these things, the mechanics of how things work. Okay. So a lot of the things that I learned like in aircraft manufacturing, which is showing like, you know, that I can talk to anyone or whatever the case is, taking those riveting classes, going in flight tests, like I volunteered myself to do that so I can learn more about certain things. I literally got forklift certified so I can show people in the shop at CSX, like I can do this, you know? So they would see me like going around with the forklift. I'm the only person who's like non-union doing this, by the way. Or I would be up like in the crane, helping with like the crane guy lifting the locomotives up and down. Like I did these things on purpose because I don't want the perception that I don't understand or this, like I'm actually hands-on doing the work, even though I'm supposed to be behind a computer coding something. So it was definitely a thing, but I would say being a Black woman in data science or in this type of area is even harder, because that example I gave you about like identifying this line or whatever. I remember my white female colleague who studies statistics. She was like, "Oh, this is great that you found it. You should talk to the director about this." And I immediately was like, he's not going to believe me. And I knew it because the guys who coded this were some Indian men. And they left or whatever the case is. And that's the reality of the case, right? Like, I mean, they kind of dominate this space at this point in time. And here comes this Black woman who is not the face of tech or data science or any of coding or anything like that. And I knew that there was like definitely a perception or favoritism. So I strategically like use her to help with my voice, even though I knew I identified this situation, right? Because I knew when I sit down in front of the director, it was going to be a discussion between me, her, and Indian men, basically. And I knew it was going to be like, whose math do you believe, even though it shouldn't be that way, right? And so I think in terms of that, that's definitely been a recurring thing. Even in consulting, I've had that issue as well.
Did you sort of intuitively feel that at that point?
Absolutely.
Or did you see other stories of women who had maybe applied that type of strategy in a similar industry, or you just were that intuitive that you're like, you know what, I need to make this move, essentially?
Yeah. You know, I think I got the idea from when I had an experience when I was working in Piper, where I actually was the first person to start peer reviews in terms of documents. It was already done in the design engineering part, but we weren't doing it within like manufacturing engineering and industrial engineering department. So I started this thing about peer reviews because I really do believe in peer reviews. And so I had a first doc that I sent out, and one of the manufacturer engineers had like point out a grammatical mistake in my document. And honestly, my English is really bad, so I'm very insecure about that. Right?
Okay.
You know, but he pointed out that he noticed that I used this word readily, and he didn't know if it was a cultural thing or not.
I see. Okay.
And I told this to my white female colleague, and she was like, "That's racist to say." I'm like, is it? And then she explained why it was. She was like, because I've posed many documents with grammatical errors for sure, and no one's ever questioned it. And then she was like, also readily is a normal word. She's like, you don't think it's kind of weird that he would just like kind of randomly point out this in a 10-page document that like you're just getting feedback more on the content side. And when she posed it like that, I was just like, okay, yeah, that context, that was like my first racist experience. It wasn't like racist to me, but it was definitely like, okay, now I have to think about how bias plays in my work. Right. And so because of that experience, then I'm like, okay, now if I presented the same document through someone else, how would that? And I actually started doing that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And you saw, like, you kind of A/B tested that and you saw the difference.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Ooh, sketchy.
And I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, but it definitely got me through some hurdles, you know. Yep. So.
Yeah, and well, those strategies paid off, and I think one of the things that I really like about your story so far is that I think oftentimes, especially for folks getting into data science, you know, and anywhere in the data space, to be honest, and ultimately sort of any tech career, you're hired to solve a damn problem.
Yeah.
Right? Not as much, you know, you do that with the algorithms and all those things that you have, but oftentimes you have to dig in and understand an industry when you've known nothing about it.
Yeah.
And like you got super hands-on. I was quite similar in the railroad industry. I got a piece of advice from a good friend of mine and Hercules, who we interviewed. And basically he said, any industry you enter, you want to become as much of an expert as possible. So he read all of the manuals when he was in the communications industry. So when I joined the railroad industry, there was a piece of equipment. I read every single thing I could. I talked to everyone that I could across, you know, almost like the world. And I became one of the experts as well. And I was able to sort of navigate, you know, certain things like that. And it seemed like you also had this extra layer of proving, you know, as a woman in a very male dominated industry, especially the railroad, that, hey, you can actually more than hack.
Yeah.
You could dominate.
Yeah.
Good. So you're onto BCG and you decided to become a consultant. I don't think you probably realized what that meant before and what burnout really was. So can you tell us about that experience and what you especially want women to walk away with, women with, you know, super technical math skills like yourself, and maybe folks who are not necessarily math inclined? And do you need to be a hardcore math person to be a good consultant?
Yeah, I mean, consulting is very interesting because I didn't even know this was, unless you're like working government space, like I didn't know this was like a thing that like is really like seeked upon as much as it is. I also didn't know that there was all these tiers to this. I mean, it's like basically separating like elite consulting from the regular consulting type of thing. So I think in many sense, I was a bit shocked in terms of like, I just didn't understand what I was getting myself into. I didn't understand what it would have meant for me to have BCG tied to my name. Like there was a lot of different aspects to this. What I loved about working at BCG in particular is there was a lot of people similar to me. So they were also everyone found their own, there's the traditional way of getting an MBA at some elite school and then getting into one of these elite consulting firms, which definitely happens still like most of the time. But then you find like your everyday normal people like myself, who's like, no one told me about elite MBA schools. No one told me about elite consulting firms. And you know, one of my close friends up to today, she was an artist, and now she's like at McKinsey doing consulting in like design space or whatever. Like these paths like actually exist. So I actually really think that this kind of brings this level of diversity within consulting space in general, which is you don't typically see in a traditional type of company. having said that, like, if you don't understand the rules of the games, either it's probably more sinking sand than it is like and like solid ground. So for example, like I didn't know that if you are good in one project, you should probably try to stay within that area. Because like in my head, I'm like, I'm still wanting to learn this and that and this, and but when you kind of put yourself into those diverse situations, you also come with like a lot of riskier things as well. If you have a good relationship with a partner, you want to stay with that partner, because it's really hard to find good relationships with other partners. Like, no one told me these, rules of engagement within consulting. So definitely, I've had some bad experiences, to say the least, when I was in BCG. Mm-hmm. But what stayed the same was this kind of ability to land with my clients, because I came from industry. So coming from industry, having those stripes and having worked with union or non-union workers, or whatever those case, goes a long way when you have conversations with people on the floor or whatever. And I can talk about my days living in West Virginia, and someone's grandmother is from West Virginia. It just kind of like brings that storyline together, and kind of level of empathy that can really resonate with the client, but not necessarily the same level of empathy that resonates within like the firm. So, yeah.
Great. And I think one of the things we really like to highlight on the show is the fact that I think growing up in the Caribbean and seeing folks of different nationalities, growing up your whole life really helps you. There's this hidden sort of innate ability to relate to other people that I think gives us, I don't want to call it an edge, right? But it allows us to maybe take energy that we would have focused on, maybe in building relationships, and it just comes very natural to us, and we're able to focus that energy elsewhere. And tell us your thoughts on how you being from the Caribbean has enabled you to maybe navigate your career in a different way.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I mean, anytime someone asks me where I'm from, I'm more than happy to say that I'm from St. Maarten, with or without them not knowing where St. Maarten is on the map. It gives me an opportunity to kind of like showcase St. Maarten. So I always feel very proud of where I'm from. And one of the main reasons why is because of this multiple nationalities. St. Maarten is 37 square miles, over 100 nationalities. My mom is from Aruba, which is another Dutch island, and she grew up speaking 4 languages. So it's very common in St. Maarten, because of the Dutch and French side, to have multiple languages on the island, and hearing different languages or different perceptions of what some things might mean because of that translation. My mom's also a linguist as well, so understanding how language kind of resonates with people came a long way. But that is inherent because of coming from the Caribbean. Like, it's not a straight yes or no, or this or that. Like, we love these kind of like blurred lines, and we kind of can see through that. I also feel like Caribbean culture in general is very welcoming. My dad's Nigerian. If you go to Nigeria, you might feel a bit more pressure to kind of do certain traditions or whatever the case is. But people come to the Caribbean and bring their traditions there. You don't have to necessarily adopt to Caribbean tradition, right? So we have a very welcoming culture, and because of that, I'm able to do that in my career, is like understand different perspectives, be more open-minded. And when you have a very technical background, I think it's very important to have this view in general. And I think that gives any Caribbean person an edge with a technical background and being from the Caribbean, because I think we are probably the least unbiased in our methodologies or how we solve a problem. So like we always kind of think through more holistically where someone else is coming from, or want to probably get another opinion, right? I think like even the peer review process, like that I think comes from my just liking to hear other people's opinions in general, which is something that my family, we talk about politics all the time back home, and everyone has a different opinion, but we're so open to that conversation. We never not have a political conversation because we have different opinions, you know?
So one of the things, I appreciate you sort of calling that out. And, you know, as the first person not from Trinidad on the show, I think I felt very strongly to definitely get different islands perspectives, right? Because I think oftentimes maybe trainees, and this is my own perspective as a trainee, is just like, you don't really hear about a lot of the other islands, or we selectively maybe choose not to, you know, dig into it, just because I think naturally our culture and all that fun stuff, you know, we don't want to raise all the stereotypes of the islands, but it's cool that you get to experience all these different languages that you then took. So I think even folks coming from your region have an even deeper skill at resonating across languages. Like in Trinidad, you just speak English, right? Whereas, you know, I'm sure you could understand many different languages, seeing that your mom, especially that your mom was a linguist as well. And there's that extra layer of importance of probably grammar or, you know language style per se, right?
Yeah.
So in your career so far, I think it's very clear that you're not afraid to move for something that you want. And is that the reason why I bring that up as a point? I think oftentimes many people, when they start off in their career, they're like, I don't know, you know, you never did consulting and you just went to consulting. You never did railroad, you just hopped into that, right? And what would you say to people on the call around that particular topic, right? How do you, what's your mindset when you go to switch a job, other than like, okay, I'm going to make X amount more? That's always a great forcing function, but I'm sure there's, you know, extra layers of imposter syndrome as you've risen higher, right?
Yeah. Making X amount more is a subset of understanding my overall potential of where I'm at, right? So it's one identifier. So for me, I'm just like, okay, I can make X amount more being here within this company. I can be either a manager or director within this company, but more than likely, I'm not going to get promoted to like VP level or something like that. That's kind of the mindset that I always think about. Another identifier is like, am I getting like challenged enough, right? So do I feel like my potential it can actually be reached internally because of the challenges that I face at work. And that doesn't have to be a single math problem. It could just be the scope of a problem, or it could be leadership skills or something like that. And then I think like another aspect for me is also, you know, can I see myself really enjoying doing this for a long period of time? And so for overall, it's just like, what is the potential here for me? And if I stop seeing, if I can't see the potential anymore, then I'm out, basically. So, and
You don't want to stay in a company for like your CLI, even if the path is super clear?
And you know, the funny thing is, especially working at the railroad, that was a very common thing for people. Because of the railroad retirement is great. But, you know, in my head, I'm just like, this cannot be the only way to get like a good retirement. Like it really does not make any sense. I'm not going to anchor myself at 60 years of age working at the railroad, which I really, you know, it's not, my love for trains were not the same for my love for planes. So it wasn't really there. Some people are like real railroaders, families
Super
and
fascinated.
generations. Exactly. Yep. They love trains. They collect trains at their house, type of thing. I was not that person. So I just felt, because of the lack of potential for me, and then also because of, just my lack of desire within the industry, that's a good opportunity for me to leave.
Great. And once again, you're not afraid to make a move. And I think a lot of your technical background, and it seems like your ability to jump into new domains, not afraid to get hands-on, has definitely been critical to your success. So not that you're at Facebook, right? And that's, when people think of, what companies do I want to go for? You want to work for FANG, right? Facebook, Apple, what is it?
Yeah.
Who's the end? Netflix? Is it Netflix?
Yeah.
And Google, right?
Yeah.
Probably an extremely strong engineering culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
And tell us, what's your experience like there, and what do you hope to learn from this piece of the journey?
Yeah. Facebook is, and I'm not like tooting Facebook horn at all, but sure. It's definitely a great place to work. In terms of like, they don't wait around for anything to happen. Like, and it's a very ground up culture. It's a company of like different small startups. You can basically say.
I see.
And for me, that is also very new, because if you come from any other type of industry outside of tech, you might be waiting for someone else to be moving the ball here, or like you're dependent on, even in consulting, you're depending on the client to reach back to you or something like that. Like, yes. In Facebook, there's no one's waiting on anyone. And if they are, that's like a bigger problem, right? And like, it's a very elevated thing. And so what I do like is, I can give you a couple examples of what I'm talking about, is like, they create their own products, not just for like users, but also for the employees as well. So that's for example, our kind of infrastructure that we do calendar invites or do sharing documents, whatever the case is, it looks just like Facebook, but it's for employees, and it's called Workplace. So I always thought that's cool. And the calendar already optimizes your schedule for you, and it already puts focused block times, or tells you what room you're supposed to be in. Yeah. So just like, Facebook created this whole calendar tool for their employees. This is amazing. Now you don't have to like get an assistant to do all of this for you. Right. So I think like that type of culture is amazing. At the same time, though, it can be sometimes chaotic, because everything is moving so fast, and everything is, I don't know, it's kind of like, it's Facebook. So people post stuff versus send emails or something like that. It's kind of just, just a weird culture to kind of get used to, for sure. What I would say, though, is that my experience still goes a long way at the company. So like, now that I have been through imposter syndrome, now that I know what, sexism or racism might look like at the workplace, now that I know what challenges I could potentially face in a work environment, I'm also creating an environment to mitigate those same challenges as well, and so I definitely, as like someone who's in a leadership position, I definitely try to continue to support the culture that Facebook has, but also create like a very unbiased atmosphere as much as possible. And that's within the work that I do, but also just from a team and org level as well.
So you're bringing that Caribbean, people come to your home type of thing,
exactly.
Super welcoming.
Exactly. And also too, one thing like some people might look at negative feedback as like a problem, right? And at Facebook, like they use this term like feedback as a gift, whatever the case is, and I have learned that even when I disagree with my peers, and we've had some really strong disagreements, that we're still moving forward, right?
Yes.
I've worked in industries and companies where when you disagree with your peer, that relationship is going to suck the rest of the project, or it's going, you know what I'm saying? And that is not the case here. Like, in fact, disagreeing is probably even more encouraged. And that's the culture I came from, like I said, my family dynamic, like we talk about politics, you have different opinions, that's totally fine. But in a lot of industries, when you have different opinions, it's not totally fine.
Right.
And
that'll affect, your whole growth and opportunities and everything, especially for women, I imagine.
Exactly.
I've been enjoying learning about how you've navigated so far. And I definitely think coming from, Tyler School from like Florida Tech, another thing that I want to make sure that is highlighted here, you didn't go to some big name school, right? And I would imagine you didn't have maybe tons of connections. And these are things that I think, especially myself, you and I both went to Florida Tech. And if you ask anyone where Florida Tech is, they probably just say somewhere in Florida. No clue where, which is completely fine. And, now that I work in NVIDIA, right?
Yeah.
I think working at these top companies, but coming from a very, very small place, we both came from the Caribbean as well. I think we just want to make sure to highlight for everyone on the call, it is possible, not to say that maybe these big companies are the end all be all in your life, but at least if that's what you're gunning for, Yinka's a great data point to add to your data set, right?
Yeah, this journey was not necessarily in my plan. So like when we were at Florida Tech, when we had career days, it was a bunch of like companies that work for the government. And as like an international student, it just seems like you're immediately disadvantaged because like, where are you going to go from here type of thing, right? I would have never got my first job opportunity if Piper didn't come to, it would have to look for a job first. And I had friends in that boat who had to leave America and go back because, now their visa time is up. And I think they only started doing STEM extension when I was already working. So that wasn't a thing, like OPT 1 year, that's it, you're out. Thank you, unless you find a job who wants to sponsor you. And those were very limited. So I feel fortunate because my journey in life kind of helped me just get to where I needed to be. And not everyone had those same opportunities. But I do recall because I knew that I had these challenges, applying for places like Google, like Facebook, and I couldn't even get past the first coding screen, right? And I say this to emphasize, like, my journey to Facebook also was not someone reached out to me and then I just did one interview and that was it. No, I did 13 interviews. I had to do coding again. And I mentioned that I hated coding and I failed coding tests before for jobs. This was definitely a investment also in myself. I mean, I knew that this was the perfect opportunity that I dreamed of, and I wanted to give it 200% to try and land this opportunity. So, sometimes things don't work out, and then sometimes it all happens for the greater, right? So yes. I just feel very fortunate to not, I'm happy with the level that I'm at. I'm happy with my earning potential, and I'm happy with the work that I'm doing, which is the most important thing. But I did have to invest quite a bit on top of my entire experience in education, right?
Yes. And I'm happy you sort of brought that up, right? It's not necessarily, I think maybe many people from the Caribbean as well believe that, oh, you get an education, that's it. You're good to go. And that's almost like nothing to some degree.
Yeah.
And all this extra preparation that you have to do, I think, I can't count how many coding interviews I've failed. And it's like water off my back now. And I think each time it's like, oh, all right, on to the next one. And what can you learn? So happy you definitely brought that up. So as we get a little closer to the end, right, you've talked a lot about your work journey. And can you sort of share with us, I don't, many people on the call would not necessarily know you were part of a party group in college, right? Naturally being from the Caribbean. So
Yes.
what do you do to sort of find work-life balance, right? Let's say consulting was probably a lot harder to have that, and maybe now at Facebook it's a little easier, but what would you remind the viewers to, maybe try to do today?
Yeah, I definitely think work-life balance is the perception that, after 5 or 6 that you're not working anymore. And I don't think that that's what it actually means. To me, what it means is that you can operate in the most productive way and environment that you could potentially can. So I'm a morning person. So I don't actually like to read emails or do anything that is very mentally challenging in the evenings or even in the afternoons. So I get things done very fast in the morning. That's like the first thing that I do is check my emails, do this, do that. Then I go work out, blah, 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 then come back to work. And then that's my day. Sometimes now that we have the luxury of working from home, sometimes I cook lunch, and spend like 30 minutes just in the kitchen away from the computer type of thing. I feel like that is more what work-life balance is, doing what works best for you and how you can bring your best self to work. So that's one. And in consulting, you don't have that opportunity to tell the client, like, yeah, I'm a morning person, so, I can't read, I can't get back to you type of thing. But I also stress this as well, because I do feel as though everyone feels like there's a rush to to produce so much throughput at work, right? So there's like, if I can just do more, do more, whatever the case is. And I actually say this to one of my data scientists. I mean, I'm like, if you think that the churn of your work is what's going to get you a high rating for a PSC, that is not what I'm evaluating. I'm evaluating based off of impact. So if you can get 2 things done with a large impact to the company versus 10 things done with very little impact, I would rate that higher, because that is really what I'm looking at. And that's really what people should be looking at in general. I mean, it's kind of like the 80-20 rule, right? Like, you want to make sure that you have, that you're making an impact. And I feel a lot of times we get into this tactical day-to-day thing, and we forget, like, why are we doing what we're doing to begin with? And that incorporates into work-life balance, because also you feel more fulfilled doing your job if you do have a larger impact. So
that was nice. I'm gonna definitely replay that a couple of times while I'm at work, and I'm like, what am I doing? Yeah, and I think maybe some folks, depending on the role that you're in, might experience this more than others, where, for instance, like if you're in a customer facing role, okay, you might do this little thing that has a big impact. I mean, you might do a lot of work. Yeah. And the customer's just like, okay, I'm going to keep paying you. I'm not going to pay you anymore. And there's maybe that little emotional trade-off you have to make in your mind as well. So my last couple of questions, what are 3 principles you live by? I've picked up definitely some lessons along the way as you've shared your journey, but if you can crystallize it, what would be the 3?
My mom actually had raised us with this saying, which is, whatever you do in life, make sure that it's ethical, moral, and legal.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah. And I have redefined what success actually means for me recently, on purpose, because I feel like I was constantly chasing promotion, or chasing like the next level, or what's the next big opportunity, whatever the case is. But really what success is synonymous to freedom and independence. Because if you can build an environment that you're in legally, ethically, and morally, and still feel a level of freedom and independence, then you're successful, right?
Yes.
And so that's how I define it. And so that's kind of my grounding 3 principles.
Okay, cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
and the last one, legal, is definitely
Important.
to pay attention to. Sometimes you think about, I see all these other things that you can do. What would be 2 pieces of advice that you have for a high schooler, someone in college, and a professional? And the reason why we broke that up specifically is I think some of the audience are folks in high school, and the environment that we grew up in high school is very different now, right? It's a world stage now. It's no longer Caribbean stage, and or you're maybe just your little island or our little island. And I think for folks in college, it's even more important to be very focused on like what it is you're going to try to do after, and think about that very deeply. So, thoughts?
Yeah, I would definitely say like seek a network as soon as possible is the first thing. I did not know about a lot of things. I feel like I learned things on the way, like we don't have, I can give you just a couple examples, even just about living in America as an immigrant. Like no understanding of what credit score actually is supposed to be. Still don't understand it, to be honest with you. But like I have friends that do. So like they give me tips. I now have a financial advisor and he tells me how to structure my finances better. These things in my head is just like American white people do these things. Like that's how I vision it. But we have access to a lot more because of the World Wide Web. And like this generation has a lot more access to a larger network. Like use that network because they will give you the play-by-play book for these things, right? I talked about my journey and landing this job at Facebook, but there's like a whole playbook about how to get into tech. Like no one told me. I wish I knew that like 5 years ago, that like there's a whole study interview guide,
Yes.
And so like these are things that I really encourage people, like use your network, get a network as soon as possible to help guide you. It's the only way you kind of survive this kind of chaotic world and navigate your career.
That's, I gotta put that one right up there. And I appreciate you sort of calling out the networking, simply because we've had a number of people on the show, and even this show was a function of networking. All of my jobs came from networking as well, and it seems like a lot of your career progression has come from very strategic relationships as you've moved along. And what would you say to? So that's one piece of advice. What would be another one that you would give?
Yeah, I think the other piece of advice, I actually did a talk on this in St. Martin around Memorial Day. My sister had hosted an event for Islandpreneur, and the topic was around living a purpose-driven innovation life, right? Innovative life or something like that. The term of purpose has really like resonated with me during the pandemic. And I think if the earlier you could try to identify like what you want your legacy to be, the better your or the more impactful or effective your career path is going to be. So like I went through this kind of like just looking at it from a potential. Only now I'm like really settling in, like, what is my purpose in life? Like, what am I actually trying to accomplish? Do I really care about being a partner? Like, you know what I'm saying? So if you can think about that at an early age, you're already set up for success, I would say.
Yeah, I'm sure you save a lot of time that way, right? And probably get a lot more sleep and enjoy life a little more as well. Great. And I think for the professionals definitely listening, you are one fantastic data point of a Black woman who has definitely navigated many different industries, gotten hands-on, proven, whatever stereotype that we attempt to uphold for whatever reason, is completely obliterated, right? And I think one of the messages I wanted to reinforce here is having a technical skill coupled with that ability to network with people, to lead people. And I think it's something that people from the Caribbean have an affinity to. And you definitely want to leverage that in your career, right? You're not a principal, you're not a researcher, you're not the top research group, right? You're in a spot where you're managing very technical people, and you're a very technical person yourself. But I think you probably knew early on, like, okay, I don't want to spend my whole day coding and all that type of stuff. So
so actually, on like, things have changed drastically in the world. Like, I mean, you needed 2 or 3 coding coding to complete a math degree. Those classes, I didn't even pay attention in. Those are the classes I didn't pay attention in. So now when it roared its head during industry jobs, I was like, oh, okay, I actually needed to do this. But even the codes were different, like the coding line. I learned Fortran, and like, exactly. It's like, why? Who's used Fortran? I think NASA still does, but still, I'm not going to work at NASA. So, I had to learn SQL on the job. Python and R just became open source out of nowhere when I started working. I was just like, I didn't really learn any of this at all. So I really felt disadvantaged. I remember when I was working at BCG, and one of the junior analysts came in, and he was like, he doesn't know how to use Excel. This guy is the best Python coder, and he doesn't know how to use Excel. And it was just mind blowing to me at that point in time that this is a gap now of like the new generation and my generation, which knows how to do Python and like call a million packages. And I'm like the queen of Excel, which is obsolete at this point. Right?
Yes. I tried to use Excel the other day, and I was like, how do I search? How do I filter? Should I just load this thing in pandas and do something? So I'm on the other side. I'm quite useless in Excel. And so I'm happy that you brought up the fact that you did math and you did OR. You didn't have necessarily like this big programming background yet. You've made it at some, you're at the top tech company, one of the top tech companies out there. You made it at the top consulting firms. So I think your Caribbean background has served you well, it seems like. And as we get to the end, what would be 3 books that you recommend that people read? Are you a big reader?
Yeah, I'm not, but I do have 3 books.
Like me, I'm not that big of a reader. I try to be. I'm a wannabe reader. I'm definitely like that.
Yeah, I'm not even a wannabe reader. I love to sit down and like look at documentaries over reading, but it's just never been. My mom always tried to get me into it, and it's never been my thing. But I do have 3 books, because these 3 books, I would say, kind of helped change my career path, or how I look at things. Think Like a Success by Steve Harvey. It's more of an interactive book, which was actually the only thing that helped me through getting to the end, to be honest, because I don't like reading. But it really kind of made me start thinking about where I wanted to be. And it also made me act soon. So like, some people, they just kind of envision this life and then they sit on it and continue working their day to day. But I was like, no, I need to stop now. Like, I need to do something now. And that kind of more impulsive behavior helped me kind of switch careers early when I was working at Piper. That was the first book that like really helped with that. The second book, which I read during the pandemic, was actually next to books I read through the pandemic. But the second book was about Think Like a Monk, which is ironic, by Jay Shetty. And these are more internal guiding principles about understanding who you are as a person, and like where you see yourself as a person. I feel like we ground ourselves so much around our careers that we just lose ourselves and our identity and our authenticity. And I think one thing as like Caribbean people, we should always try to continue to be authentic to we are. And like, I loved when I joined Facebook because one of the first sessions during training was around diversity and inclusion. And the CMO of Facebook, Maxine
Williams,
is a trainee woman, and she talks about her struggle with her hair. And I was just like, this is great. You know, you're bringing your authenticity to work in order to deliver a message. That's how we should always think about representing ourselves at work. We shouldn't think about coming up with a representative for work. We should just represent who we are at work, right? So that's really, that book helped me kind of like ground me back into like, okay, this is who I am as a person. And then the third book is The Grit. And this book just helped me with perseverance, because there were times that I really feel like I'm kind of like out of my comfort zone here. I don't know if I can do this. Even with the Facebook job, there was a time where I was just like, I just spent a ton of money investing in all these interview study notes, and I don't know if I can really do this.
Yes.
And The Grit talks about, from a high level, just like perseverance and drive goes a longer way than talent. And if like that just resonated with me so hard. So I just, because of that, like life principle, I'm just like, you know, continue trying. Because what's going to differentiate me from someone else landing an opportunity is not that they're smarter, is that I basically understood the game better and I kept like pushing towards it, right? So
Hey, there's, not gonna lie, there's lots of nuggets in here. Those three books, given that you don't read very much, I've never heard of them. So which means you're on whatever strategy you're doing, keep going. It looks like it's working out quite well. So, and even that's another data point as well. I think in a lot of my research and a lot of people that I've spoken to, like, you know, reading is this fundamental thing. You see people who are doing really well, and that's not necessarily a trait that you really resonate with as much. And you're still, you know, watching documentaries is probably the trick.
Yeah.
You know? Fantastic. So I wanted to really thank you for sharing your story. As a Black woman, you know, we definitely wanted to highlight maybe some of the things that as a Black woman you might face out there, especially in a tech career. And we're super stoked to have, you know, a non-Trini on the thing, actually representing the true Caribbean. And once again, I've learned a lot from the story, and we hope that everyone on the call learns a lot as well. So thanks for your time.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you also for having me. I think this is great. You know, I wish there was things like this when I was, you know, in college, and kind of getting some life advice and whatever the case is. But I also want to stress also that the importance of studying something technical. You know, I grew up with parents who really wanted to see me study the science package and not the business package in CXC, right? Not everyone has those opportunities, and some people feel like the sale has shipped or whatever the case is. And to your point earlier, like, it's never too late to study these things. People are getting certificates online every day, and they're becoming easier to learn as well. And I think the second thing is, do not think that you can't do it either. You know, the book, The Grit, really talks about perseverance. Like, this really is something that you have to kind of push towards. And, you know, don't let any negative person or naysayer say anything about you, that what you can or cannot do. I had one high school counselor who told me that studying something technical were for the Indian kids in my school.
What?
Yeah.
What madness is that?
And I'm, because the kind of person that I am, that even give me more drive, but not everyone's the same way, right? That I see that as a challenge. So now I'm going to do it for sure. And I want to just encourage people, like, I understand these people exist in the world, and I understand that you may face some of these things, but it shouldn't be a reason to stop or give up. So
really happy you call those things out. And I wanted to share very quick, weird story. I talked to someone the other day And I was like, yeah, why don't you consider a career in tech? And he was just like, yeah, I don't know. That's too much trouble to go through all that work I have to do to interview. And I'm like, wow, not everyone is really wired to make a switch and to essentially push themselves. And it's not easy.
Yeah.
And so I think, especially from your story, like there's a shit ton of work that you put in to get to this point, but it seems to be worth it, right?
Yeah, definitely. And all we can do is continue to encourage other Caribbean people to like learn in this space, because our representation really goes a long way. A place like Facebook, some of the business problems I think about the small business in the St. Martin that can't get on our platform because we have like really strong like enforcement rules about scamming. I'm like, we still want to do a good thing, but at the same time, we're kind of restricting certain problems as well. And so, but I can bring that perspective to the company. More of us bringing that to tech companies helps, right? And it helps move the needle, not just for us, but for the rest of the world. So
yes. Hey. This has been a good one. And once again, thank you very much for your time. And we'll definitely bring you back on at some point.
So, absolutely. Take care.
All right. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.